The 1970 election crisis. Let's start with a simple question. What happens when people vote and their vote is ignored? In 1970, Pakistan held its first general election and the result was crystal clear. Sheikh Mujibur Rahman's Awami League won 167 out of 169 in East Pakistan. That became a clear majority in 313 national assemblies. In any functioning democracy, this would mean one thing: Sheikh Mujibur Rahman becomes the prime minister. But that's not what happened. The political elite in West Pakistan, led by General Yahya Khan, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, refused to give away the power because the Awami League had proposed a six-point demand. That is, these demands called for greater regional autonomy. In simpler terms, East Pakistan wanted control over its own economy, taxation, and administration. For the West Pakistan leadership, this felt like losing control. So instead of respecting democracy on March 1, 1971, Yahya Khan indefinitely postponed assembly sessions. No explanations, timelines, just postponement. And that decision changed the whole history. Mass protests erupted, civil disobedience began, government offices stopped functioning in East Pakistan. It was no longer just a political disagreement. It became a legitimacy crisis, and once democracy denied, conflict becomes almost invisible. And here in the operation, the Dhaka burn, March 25, 1971 at night, Pakistan military launched Operation Searchlight. Officially, it was described as a move to restore order. In reality, it was a military crackdown, and it began in Dhaka. One of the first targets, Dhaka University. Hostels were surrounded and students were shot inside their dormitories. Professors were executed. It was not random violence, it was targeted. The intellectual class, professors, writers, doctors, were seen as ideological backbone of the Bengali nationalists movement. Remove the leadership, crush the resistance. That was the logic. Many historians and the human rights organizations described what followed as genocide. There was a widespread reports of indiscrimination, civilians killing, entire village destroyed, systematic sexual violences, estimating suggests between 200,000 to 400,000 women were subjected to rape. Let that number sink in. This wasn't a collateral damage, it was weaponized terror. Even the United States Council General in Dhaka, Orchid Blitz, said what later became known as the Blitz telegram, and he criticized the US government's silence there. He called cases of moral bankruptcy because geopolitics often speaks louder than the human rights. Operation Searchlight didn't just suppress the movement, it kind of radicalized it, and it triggered something much bigger. A refugee crisis of 10 million people who crossed into India as violence spread. Civilians began fleeing, not by hundreds, not by thousands, but by millions. Approximately 10 million people crossed into India. Think about the scale as that's larger than the population of many countries today. And they entered the West Bengal, Tripura, Zam with nothing but what they could carry. India at time was not an economic powerhouse. The economy was completely fragile, resources were limited, yet refugee camps had to be built almost overnight. And food shelters, medical aid, sanitations to fund relief efforts. The Indian government even imposed a small 5 paisa refugee tax. Supporting 10 million displaced people was financially overwhelming enough. But the crisis was not just economic; it was strategic. Refugee camps were overcrowded. Disease outbreaks were real risks. Border safety was destabilized. Prime Minister Indira Gandhi at that time faced a brutal calculation continue supporting 10 million refugees indefinitely or intervene military and attempt to resolve the crisis at its source. From her, the last long-term cost of inflation became greater than the cost of war, and that's when the regional conflict began transforming into international one. The Mukti Bahini guerrilla resistance against the state army. When the Operation Searchlight began, it was meant to crush resistance, but instead it created it. Out of the chaos emerged the Mukti Bahini, which literally means the liberation force. This was not a regular army at the beginning. It was made up of Bengali soldiers who deflected from the Pakistan army and members of parliamentary forces, students, ordinary civilians, people who had seen their neighborhoods destroyed, their families displaced erased completely, their future denied. Guerrilla war, it was against a convenient army. Let's be clear, the Pakistan military had better equipment, better organization, heavy artillery, air power. Mukti Bahini did not, so they adapted. They used guerrilla tactics, hit and run operations, sabotage the missions, blowing up bridges, targeting supply lines, disrupting communication networks. Instead of holding the territory, they made governing impossible. India's strategic support at the same time, millions of refugees were pouring into India. Crisis was no longer contained within the East Pakistan. India began providing trainings, weapons, intelligence, supports, logistical coordination in Iraq. The Indian military set up training camps across the border. From these bases, Mukti Bahini fighters operated with increasing effectiveness. Slowly, Pakistan's grip over the countryside weakened. By late 1971, large rural areas were effectively outside Islamabad's control. The resistance had matured and it was preparing for something much bigger. India enters the war, strategy, diplomacy, and the global politics where the story becomes global. Prime Minister Indira Gandhi did not rush into war. Before any military action, she went on 21-day diplomatic tour, Washington, London, Paris, Moscow. Her global was simple, show the world what was happening in East Pakistan. Geopolitical complicated everything. At that time, the United States had a strong alliance with Pakistan. Why? Because President Nixon and Henry Kissinger was secretly using General Yahya Khan as a channel to open diplomatic relationship with China. In other words, Pakistan was strategically important for the US, which meant India could not rely on the Western support anymore at that time. The Indo-Soviet Treaty, so India made a calculated move. In August 1971, it signed the Indo-Soviet Treaty of Peace, Friendship, and Cooperation. And this ensured that if a large war broke out, India would not stand alone diplomatically. It was Cold War chess, and every move mattered. The war officially began on December 1971. On December 3, Pakistan launched Operation Genghis Khan, preemptive airstrikes on 11 Indian airfields. The intention was clear, neutralize the India air power. So because instead of deterring India, it gave India formal justification to enter the war. And the timely response was decisive. 13 days that changed South Asia. What followed was one of the shortest full-scale wars in modern history. Just 13 days, India immediately established the superiority in East Asia. Instead of attacking every stronghold, the Indian forces bypassed heavily defended areas. They moved fast, a multi-pronged assault, away from multiple directions. Air Force targeting the supply lines, Navy blockading ports, naval power operating trident targets. Karachi, Chittagong port was blockaded. Pakistan supply routes were cut off. East Pakistan became isolated. No reinforcements, no escape. The fall of Dhaka, the final objective was clear from the start. Dhaka, by the Indo-Soviet Treaty, so India made a calculated move. In 1971 August, it signed the Indo-Soviet Treaty of Peace, Friendship, and Cooperation. This ensured that if a larger war broke out, India would not stand alone diplomatically. It was Cold War chess, and every move mattered here. The war officially began on December 3, 1971. Pakistan launched Operation Genghis Khan, preemptive airstrikes on 11 Indian airfields. And the intention was clear, neutralize India's air force. But the strategy backfired because instead of deterring India, it gave India formal justification to enter the war. And this time, the response was decisive. 13 days that changed South Asia. What followed was one of the shortest full-scale wars in modern history. Just 13 days. India established air superiority in the east, and then came the strategy. Instead of attacking every stronghold, Indian forces bypassed heavily defended areas. They moved fast, a multi-pronged assault, coming from multiple directions. Air Force targeting the supply lines, Navy battling ports, naval operation in trident targets Karachi. Chittagong port was blockaded. Pakistan supply routes were cut off. East Pakistan became isolated, not reinforced, not escaped. A fall of Dhaka. The final objective was clear from the start. Dhaka. By mid-December, India and Mukti Bahini forces converged on the capital on December 16, 1971 at Ramna Race Course in Dhaka. The Pakistan Eastern Command signed the instrument of surrender. 90,000 Pakistan soldiers surrendered, the largest military surrender since World War II. With that, Bangladesh was born on the day. Genocide rose and regional partnerships were ended, but the consequences remained. In Pakistan, the Hamudur Rahman Commission investigated the defeat. It indicated several generals for corruptions and moral failures, but the findings were suppressed for decades. No major accountability followed. In Bangladesh, an international crime tribunal was later established to prosecute collaborators. Justice through delayed war pursued the Simla Agreement in July 1972. India and Pakistan signed the Simla Agreement later. India returned the captured territory and 3,000 prisoners of war were eventually repatriated, and the gestures aimed at the regional stability. The partnership, but strategically, everything had changed, and India demonstrated military coordination, diplomatic maneuverism, strategic planning emerged as dominant power in South Asia. Pakistan was split, Bangladesh became the independent nation, and the regional balance of power shifted permanently. The birth of Bangladesh was not just a military event, it was about the democracy denied, human rights violated, refugees displaced, and geopolitical strategy executed. It reshaped South Asia, and even today, the political tensions and the historical narratives, the dynamics all trace back to 1971. Because the history doesn't stay in the past, it defines the present and will repeat in the future.